don't you make money?
I knock people down.
You mean like a prize fighter?
No, they're pickup fights. The money's made on bets.
Charles Bronson was like a big smoker. He could only shoot like 30 seconds of fighting before he got like tired and shit, before he had to like take a break. And also James Coburn was not getting along with Walter Hill on the set because of the fact that he felt like he was playing second fiddle to Charles Bronson, where James Coburn was usually like the star. So they like had like a beef on the set, and they were like not like fucking with each other. He thought he was like better than that guy. You know, he was like, Charles Bronson is like an older dude, and like I had my prime like 10 years ago, and they had like a beef like on the set.
Him and Walter Hill?
Charles Bronson had a beef with James Coburn, and James Coburn also had a beef with Walter Hill. He wasn't getting along because of he was just jealous of Charles Bronson.
But he was playing second fiddle with Charles Bronson. I hate to break it to him, but he was. Which is still good. He was amazing in it.
Yeah,
but
I like him a lot. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
Columbia Pictures presents Hard Times, starring Charles Bronson as Chaney, a drifter.
When I get enough change in my pocket, I'm going.
Welcome back to another episode of the Medium Cool Show. Today we have an extra special video because we're going to be talking about the film Hard Times from 1975, written and directed by the one and only Walter Hill, and his directorial debut.
It's his debut?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so starring Charles Bronson and James Coburn, which tickled my fancy quite a bit. I'm a fan of both those guys. Walter Hill, legendary new Hollywood director when he came up. And I just want to say this movie bangs hard.
Dude,
it's right up my alley. Like just like manly, masculine, testosterone-driven energy. I just feel like it's really like for us, this type of film.
Yeah,
you know,
this movie rocks, dude.
Yeah, it kicks ass. Charles Bronson at the height of his career, even though he was 52 when he made this movie.
Yeah,
which typically like actors really blow up maybe like in their like mid 30s, pretty much. You know, and we also got James Coburn, who's also kind of at the end of his peak. As well. But Walter Hill wrote the script, originally intimidated by Charles Bronson, but he had a lot of respect for Walter Hill because he also wrote the material and he liked the script. So that's why he joined in on the film. And he cast James Coburn as his, what would you say, like his manager for the...
his bookie.
Yeah, it's bookie. Why don't you lay out the premise and everything so they get an idea of what we're talking about?
Yeah, so this movie takes place in Louisiana, New Orleans in 1930.
Yeah.
And we see...
which is the Great Depression.
Yeah. We see Charles Bronson come into town on a train.
Yeah.
He's just kind of observing, you know. It's clear he doesn't have a lot of money to his name at the moment. We don't really know much about his past, and we never really learn much about his past in this movie.
Yeah.
But I guess it doesn't really matter because he's just so fucking cool. And he wanders into an underground fight scene where James Coburn is there, and he's a bookie.
Bare-knuckle boxing.
Bare-knuckle.
In a warehouse somewhere.
They're all in some kind of manly warehouse on a boat in some kind of industrial complex.
Yeah.
And it's for the fucking men, you know, not a woman in sight.
Fuck no. Besides hookers. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Remember? They're literally all like all the women besides I guess James Coburn's fiance are like hookers because Charles Bronson meets his wife at the time, his literal wife.
Oh, really?
IRL is in this movie, but she plays a hooker, and he's trying to like woo her and treat her like a gentleman.
Yeah.
Right, and she at first is like, "Oh, like I'm not interested. Whatever, buy me shit, whatever." But keep going with the fight.
Yeah, but anyway, on the story, so James Coburn has this fighter, right, and it's not Charles Bronson, some other dude, and he's like prepping him up, and you see him. The way they bet is like they're so fast talking, and they're like, "Yeah, I put $10 down on this guy," and that's a lot of money back then. You know, during the Great Depression, it's just like a couple bucks for us, but like it's a lot of money. And his fighter loses pretty easily, and then
James Coburn's fighter.
James Coburn's fighter. And then Charles Bronson sees him at a diner. He goes And he sits down at his table, and James Coburn's like, "Oh, what do you want? What do you want from me?" He's like, we can make a lot of money together. I can beat this guy if you want."
Yeah.
And so they go back to the fight that night, and they're all like, "Oh, what do you want, old man?" Because they're all saying Charles Bronson's out of shape. He's past his prime, you know, but he's in fucking great shape. Like Charles Bronson, the actor, for being 52, he's in like peak shape, like
For
movie
sure.
star shape nowadays. Not back then where it was like, you had a little chub on you, you had chest hair and shit. He was like, you know,
he's
he could
brawny.
be a model.
He's brawny.
Yeah. He could be a model nowadays.
I mean, he's fucking Charles Bronson.
Yeah, dude.
I mean, in our mind, like, what I love so much about these fighting martial arts movies, like movies like Roadhouse and like Lionheart, is that we know in our back of our minds, oh, it's Charles Bronson. He's fucking badass. He's gonna beat up everyone.
Yeah.
And then I love these little slow burn beginnings where it's like everyone's doubting them. And he's like super humble.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, this guy can't fight. He can't fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's like, hey, I don't want any issues. I'm just trying to make some cash. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then he finally gets his first fight. And what happens?
One punch, the guy goes down.
Yeah, he punches him. And but what the thing is, they don't make that much money because like they only could bet like $12 or some shit. And no one wants to like bet on the, but the odds are really high for him. But they managed to get some money, right?
Yeah.
So he wins that first fight. And James Coburn's like, holy shit, I got this guy's like the greatest fighter I've ever had. You know, we gotta make use of this. So they go to the ship.
So they're in New Orleans now. They were in the little outskirts of New Orleans, but now they're in town.
Yeah.
And on the ship, they're kind of just watching. They're setting up, seeing what targets they want to pick, you know. And they see this dude who's this bald guy who's supposed to be the best fighter in town.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're gonna take you on. And the bookie there too is like the best bookie in town, right? And they're like, nah, you're not ready for us yet. They're still doubting Charles Bronson, you know?
The biggest bookie in town has, at that point, the greatest fighter who's like this big, untouchable, bald, big, like brawny dude.
Who smiles. Like he's just got this like smile on his face all the time, you know?
And he seems untouchable because every time he punches him, it seems like it makes him stronger and happier because he just like can't even get, like once he gets hit and doesn't even faze him whatsoever. And it's like, damn, like no one can beat this guy. He's obviously made tons of money on this dude, this like bookie keeper. And then what we have to also discuss is James Coburn is in debt to these loan sharks, right?
Yeah, he's bad with his money.
He's bad with his money. He's a frequent gambler. He's a gambling addict, probably like a drunk as well.
Yeah, he's like a little, you know, chauvinistic bard.
Yeah, but once he goes back to the loan sharks and he's like, oh, I need to borrow $1,000 because the buy-in for the fight is $1,000.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, fine, but you're gonna have to pay us $50 per day on the interest for us to give you this money.
Yeah, because they don't trust him.
Yeah, they don't trust him because he's like a kind of guy that like, you know, pays Peter through Paul type shit. You know, like he borrows money to pay someone back.
Yeah.
And you know, he's really bad with his money, but Charles Bronson is a sure thing to fight this undefeated dude. Yeah. So he goes and tries to place a bet for 1,000 buy-in. Yeah. And then, but
they're like, no, you're not ready. They're like, you can't fight us yet. We're not gonna let the buy-in now for you 5,000.
And this guy, I have to mention, is an upper class dude. Like he's like a rich dude who like goes to these really fancy like clubs, like restaurants. He's part of like the upper echelon of society, the bourgeoisie, which I feel like goes really well with Charles Bronson character, who's like salt of the earth, hardworking American guy, everyday man who represents
gentleman. Like, he's a gentleman to women.
Yeah, but he's like kind of represents the working class compared to the upper class bourgeoisie, who he does not give a fuck about. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So when James Coburn places the bet, he's like, oh no, you're trying to trick me. Actually, the buy-in's $3,000. Yeah. So he has to get $3,000. Yeah. So what they do is they go out to some prairie marshland, the bayous to do a fight. Yeah. And
they're fighting these like kind of swamp trash people.
Yeah, yeah. So he's able to do a fight and these swamp trash people gang out there in the bayou. And he wins the fight, taking no hits, just fucking beats the shit out of this guy.
Beats the shit out of their best fighter. Yeah. And then they pull out their guns and they're like, we're not gonna pay you. Yeah. And James Coburn's like, what? And Charles Bronson's like, let it go. We'll win the next one. Yeah. Shit. And then they go back.
And the guy accuses him of being a ringer.
Yeah.
He accuses him of being a ringer. He's like, where the fuck did you get this guy? You know what I mean? Like, you tricked us. And he's like, the fight is a fight. Like, we won. And then they all like pull their guns on them.
And so Charles Bronson's like de-escalates the situation, right?
Yeah.
They get into the car. He's like, let's take a drive around. Maybe we'll run into someone. And like, he's got a plan in mind.
Yeah.
And they drive around till night. And there's this bar in the swamp where all these guys are hanging out.
Yeah.
Charles Bronson breaks in, and what does he do? He just beats the shit out of people, takes someone's gun, and he's like, now I got the gun.
He gets into a brawl in the dive bar, and he takes a gun and starts just shooting up the place. Not people, but he's just shooting up the place. He gets the money from him, and then they get the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
And it's such a badass, great scene. One of the many great scenes in this picture.
And I feel like we haven't even got to the best scenes in this picture,
which
are the fights where he's pushed to his limit.
Yeah.
Those scenes are so good. It feels like these fights go on for at least 5 minutes. When he fights the bald guy in the next scene, because finally the fight is set up, he fights that undefeated fighter. That scene's amazing, dude.
Yeah. So
they're just punching each other, and they're just wailing on each other, and the fight, you're like, who's gonna win? The tension is there, and it's so good, dude. Yeah,
because from the money they got in the bayou, they finally have the $3,000 to go and bet on the big fight to fight like the bald, untouchable dude. Yeah, and that scene is so good, and the fight is like so real. It's so realistic for like 1975 too. You know what I mean? And
I will say this though. It is realistic, but I did think it was really interesting, and I kind of respected the choice to not have any blood.
Yeah, but did you read about why?
No.
He said, Walter Hill's like, everyone says, oh, there's not like any blood or anything, but he said like it's not a fight, it's a dance.
Damn.
That's what he said. But that fight scene is the best one in the movie. We're in that big ass cage in that warehouse, and it's so intense because Charles Bronson is obviously the superior fighter, but he's also older. He's landing all these punches and just not doing anything. So he has to like fucking punch him like 100 times in order to like finally beat him. Yeah. And there is like struggle in there. And then you're like, oh fuck, is he actually gonna like win? And he finally beats him down and gets like the money, right? And at that point, the whole politics of the city shifts because the main bookie that they fought had the #1 guy. But now he's like, I want Charles Bronson on my team. I want him. And he tries to buy him out, but he's like, nope, not doing it. And James Coburn's like, I don't know what to tell you, man. Can't do it. And James Coburn he owes $1,000 to these loan sharks.
And he doesn't have the money because he
gambles all the winnings away, even though he had all the money. So he's in the hole.
He's like, why don't we reconsider that offer? We can go 50-50 with his other bookie. Yeah. And, it will be okay. But Charles Bronson's like, no, it's the principle. He's like, I don't like that guy. Yeah. That's it. It's not the money for him. It's like, does he like him? And it kind of makes you respect James Coburn a little bit more because that Charles Bronson sees in him some form of, a moral compass. Yeah. And he knows that he's a good guy. And I love that about Charles Bronson. He's able to like understand people's motivations behind money, Yeah, and judge them upon that.
He's just trying to hit a lick and go to the next town. Hop on a train like a hobo. Yeah. Go to the next town. And James Coburn makes a deal with the loan sharks because the upper echelon bookie boss buys his debt out. Yeah. And he's like, and holds him hostage in order for Charles Bronson to come back and do the final fight. And the head bookie dude brings in a guy from out of town who's supposed to be the greatest fighter of all time.
The best bare-knuckle boxer of all time.
Yeah. And they do the final fight, which seems like it's Charles Bronson's hardest fight yet, right?
And it's like no audience. Yeah. It's not a spectacle or anything like that. It's just a couple dudes in a parking garage watching this fight. Yeah. And it's like, they spent so much money on this just for themselves to watch it, which I thought was so cool. It's like just for them. Yeah. They just have to see themselves.
Finally, like you think that maybe he would lose, but he fucking overcomes it. He wins. And then he's just like, I'm done. And just like leaves, takes some money and gets the fuck out of there and moves on to the next town. And that's how the movie ends.
Yeah. But also, it's worth noting too. Charles Bronson pays a shit ton of money to get James Coburn out of this situation, and then after he wins, he gives James Coburn like $1,000 or something like that, or $2,000.
Yeah.
He doesn't need the money, you know. He's just like, hey, take care of yourself, and like, just hopes that like James Coburn learned his lesson, which I doubt he did, but. It's a happy ending. It's a happy ending for everyone. You know, they get the best fight they've ever seen.
Yeah. And also, what's interesting about this film is that Charles Bronson was like a big smoker. He could only shoot like 30 seconds of the fighting before he got like tired and shit, before he had to like take a break. And also, James Coburn was not getting along with Walter Hill on the set because of the fact that he felt like he was playing second fiddle to Charles Bronson, where James Coburn was usually like the star. So they like had like a beef on the set, and they were like not like fucking with each other. He thought he was like better than that guy. You know, he was like Charles Bronson is like an older dude, and like I had my prime like 10 years ago, and they had like a beef like on the set.
Him and Walter Hill?
Charles Bronson had a beef with James Coburn, and James Coburn also had a beef with Walter Hill. He wasn't getting along because of he was just jealous of Charles Bronson.
But he was playing second fiddle to Charles Bronson. I hate to break it to him, but he was. Which is still good. He was amazing in it.
Yeah,
but
I like him a lot. I'm a big fan.
Yeah,